Hello, and welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and today we are going to be looking at the nature of natures and observing this phenomenon that we call nature in the context of the Hermetic principle as above, so below, and to be or not to be. The reason why I'm getting into this today is I encountered a post referring to the number 13 and how it has all of this significance and that it is the perfect number and it's the most important number in nature and the the moon governs it, and we'll get into some of the details. And what's important to note is all of the or a great deal of the evidence surrounding this number 13, or the great deal of information, of the arguments made for the superiority of the number 13 relates to its observable significance in mechanical nature, particularly as it relates to the moon. And for example, if we were to divide the year into 13 months instead of 12, how all of this mathematical precision would result. That all the months would be, what is it, precisely 30 days, and the first of the month would always land on a Monday, or I can't remember exactly what the details are on that. But it is this idea that the significance of the number 13 is relatable or observable because of the so-called perfection that we can accrue here in mechanical nature in the world, as, for example, as we calculate time, as opposed to dividing the year up into 12, and then we get all this crazy stuff that we get, right, with the calendars. And this post that I'm not going to share because I don't want to reveal the individual who shared it. It's something that we encounter a lot. And what Gnostics in particular have been accused of time and time again is that we hate nature and that we fear nature. And so it is something that I feel needs to be re-emphasized again and again, that there are two natures. And too often in the spiritual circles, these two natures are conflated. They're confused. One is projected onto the other. Or it is assumed that because both are divine, in the sense of God created nature, right, or in divine mother nature, that nature seeks perfection on all of its levels. Ergo, it is enough on the spiritual journey to mimic or embrace, or indeed, as many do, worship nature. And this is a grave error. This is a grave mistake. And without discernment, without the capacity to recognize the subtle yet significant differences in the so-called perfection of nature as it is expressed in mechanical nature, we will not be able to free ourselves from it. We will remain trapped in it, and we will remain unconscious of divine nature and the particular idiosyncrasies of divine nature as opposed to mechanical nature. Now, to the intellect and to most pseudo-spiritualists, pseudo-esotericists, people who think that they're on the path, this is for them confounding and confusing or unacceptable. They can't even begin to process this. But that is because they're identified and attached to the nature that's all around them, including their own physical, mechanical nature. And then they like to quote that famous idiom of Hermeticism, as above, so below, as if the mechanical nature around them reflects divine nature above and is just as perfect in every way and is to be mimicked, is to be modeled after. And you see this happening a lot, actually, that individuals will justify certain behaviors because it's observable in mechanical nature. Well, animals do it. And then you have the particularly troublesome belief of humanity when they point to apes or monkeys or chimpanzees or orangutans or whatever. And they say, look, our closest cousins behave this way. It's perfectly normal for us. This is this is just, for someone who has spent a lifetime in pursuit of intimate, direct, conscious knowledge of divine nature. These sorts of intellectual and inferior emotional affirmations, the identifications and attachments to other hominids and other hominid species, is an anathema. It is beyond insult, but it's very sad. It's very heartbreaking. Because what they don't realize, what they don't comprehend, is that those other so-called great apes are devolved humanities. They're remnants of humanities that fell into devolution. Neither chimpanzees or gorillas or any of the great apes, for that matter, are evolving, are ascending. They're devolving. And if one honestly and objectively observes the behaviors of chimpanzees, for instance, especially the fierce tribalism between chimpanzee troops and the absolute ferocity with which they will essentially go to war and go on raiding parties to other troops. This is something that we are supposed to emulate on the spiritual path. And many people will argue, well, there's nothing wrong with that. And then, of course, we get into the obvious reason why individuals will defend and try to put on a pedestal mechanical nature. And that is because they are very much identified and attached to their own desires, their own animal passions. Namely, first among them, their desire for sexual gratification. Right? Lust. And that lust is perfectly natural, and that, all the animals procreate that way, and there's nothing wrong with, seeking the orgasm and seeking sexual gratification via sexual activity. And of course, for animals, there is, of course, nothing wrong with it, because at their level, that is the way that they were created, and that is the way that they procreate. So, but at their level, and this is the key, to say as above, so below, that is not an axiom of perfect one-to-one duplication. The universe below, the dimensions below, are not a carbon copy of the dimensions above. They are at a different level of consciousness. There would be no need for a below if it was exactly like above. It would serve no purpose. That would be like you having an outside of your house that was exactly like the inside of your house. Why would you ever leave your house when you went out your front door and you stepped into another copy of your house? An exact duplicate, right? That's ridiculous. Obviously, you go outside because it's different. And you go outside because there are things that you need. There are experiences that you can gain. There are others that you can interact with in unique and interesting ways out there, outside your house, than you can inside your house. Unless you're a multimillionaire and have a swimming pool in your house, you can't go, you have to go outside to go swimming, or you have to go someplace else to go swimming. Right? And surely you can't go scuba diving in your house. You can't go skydiving in your house. These are just very hyperbolic examples, but they make the point is that there is a reason why this dimension is called the kingdom in Kabbalah, Malkut, the kingdom. And it is the point in which two natures collide and to a degree overlap. It is like the image behind me, where you have the world of oxygen above and the world of water below. And while the two worlds are related, there are unique and distinct differences between them. Namely, that everything beneath the surface of the water is far more dense by definition. The water is more dense than the air above it. And naturally, the air may be full of birds and clouds and all the phenomenon that we're familiar with as surface dwellers. But beneath the surface, the creatures are vastly different. remarkably so. And the deeper you go, the more different everything becomes, the flora and the fauna. It is truly another world. And on this planet is one of the most, by comparison, vastly underexplored and vastly misunderstood compared to the surface. Obviously, because we're surface dwellers. And at the best of times, with the best technology we have, we have only mapped a fraction of a fraction of the ocean floor. And we've only explored even less than that. Because, I mean, it must have been a year or so ago, maybe 18 months ago, there was that tragedy with that deep sea diving catastrophe where their submersible imploded because of the extreme pressure. So with the best technology that we have available to us, and of course lack of funding and everything else, there's just simply, business sees no benefit in doing deep sea ocean exploration. So it's not easy for us to really truly understand the depths of the ocean. So the ocean is, to a large degree, still a mystery to us. But the point of the analogy is to illustrate that a world above and a world below can be related. For instance, there are mammals on the surface, and there are mammals in the ocean, and there are mammals who can only live in the ocean, or they're only meant to live in the ocean, let's put it that way. So the mammals on the surface, despite having physiologically so many, and genetically so many similarities, right? If you put a human next to a blue whale or a humpback whale, there is no immediate visual cue that suggests that these two creatures are related to one another. But we're very closely related, actually. Again, physiologically, genetically. So you could say, as above, the mammals as above, so the mammals below. And this goes for many other species. There are crabs that only exist on the land. And there are crabs that only exist underwater, on the reefs or even deeper. And then there are birds, right, like penguins, who prefer to be underwater. They fly. Penguins literally fly underwater. It's incredible to watch. The poor things are very, very awkward on the land. But get them into the ocean and they're like torpedoes. They're incredible to watch when they're swimming. Incredible swimmers. But they're birds. So there's not to say that there's no crossover, but to say that, again, the analogy is there in order to illustrate that the axiom as above, so below, in no way, shape, or form is meant to suggest that the nature below, our nature, this physical, mechanical nature, is divine in the same way that divine nature is. In other words, the two levels of nature have different natures. And this should not be controversial. But somehow, for religious people or so-called spiritual people who are so identified and attached to mechanical nature, because God created it, right? The Garden of Eden, God created the world in 7 days. If you're on the religious side or on the spiritual side, because of the Aboriginal communities who are worship Mother Gaia, and they're so one and connected with nature and everything else. They don't want to hear this truth. They don't want to accept and swallow this hard truth, this bitter pill. And because Gnostics make a point of emphasizing this, that the path is all about escaping our lower natures in order so that we may self-realize, attain and acquire and evolve, continue the evolution of the monad beyond physical nature into our supernal natures, our higher natures, our divine nature. But this gets misinterpreted and misunderstood by those who do not comprehend Gnosis. And they point their fingers and they accuse us of being nature haters. We hate nature and we're afraid of nature. And this is wrong. This is flat out wrong. This is like saying a tree is afraid of its roots. Right? A tree needs its roots. A tree cannot exist without its roots. But the tree does not live in the ground. The tree has its roots in the ground, beneath the surface. But its branches reach to the heavens. That's the whole point. And it is in that framework that a genuine Gnostic comprehends the necessity of nature, the absolute critical role that it plays in the development of a monad, in the development of the innermost. Because the innermost, the monad in us, is just a seed. So if you can visualize a seed planted in the earth, and the transformation that the seed has to undergo, the seed has to die. It must sprout. And as it does so, a root goes down and a fledgling sprout goes up. It's not that the monad hates mechanical nature, that it is trying to escape, any more than the sprout hates the soil. It doesn't hate the soil. It needs the soil. Its roots are drilling deeper into the soil. But why? Because it's a sprout and it seeks to sprout. Sprout is one of those words where it's a noun and a verb. It is what its action is. And it's very interesting that sprout is like that, because another word that is linguistically the same, where it is both a noun and a verb, it is what its action is. Another word is being. Which brings us to that other famous axiom, to be or not to be. That is the question. And that axiom, that question, very much is making reference to the two natures of nature. Because if all we are a physical body and a mind and emotions and sensations related to that physical body and the physical experience, then we are like a fish under the water, completely oblivious and incapable of knowing that other world out there, up there, on the land. In fact, this is the esoteric meaning. This is the true esoteric meaning of the Little Mermaid, who, what does she want? What does she want more than anything? What does she long for more than anything? To be able to go and experience life on the land. Now, the tale of the Little Mermaid has her go to a sea witch and essentially make a deal with the devil in order to, and the sea witch, Ursula, casts a spell. So she turns to black magic, in other words, to try and catch a glimpse of life on the land. But in the process, she loses her voice, she can't communicate, and so on. You know the story. I don't have to recount it all. But the point is that there you have two natures, above and below. And while everybody else, all the other mermen and merwomen, mer people, is that what you would say? They're all just doing their thing. And Sebastian the Crab, if I'm referring to the Disney adaptation of that particular I believe it's a Hans Christian Andersen original fairy tale. I may be wrong on that, but I think it was a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, The Little Mermaid. And so Sebastian the Crab has this whole song and dance that he says, trying to convince Ariel not to go out on land. So the mer people, they have their own little world and they don't want anything to do with the world up there. And that's, generally speaking, most people. Even if they do worship a deity, and even if they do believe in a heaven and so on and so forth, practically speaking, they're not living their life and doing the work in order to be able to develop the vehicles necessary to be able to leave their world and exist in that other world, in that higher world. Or they believe that they're entitled to exist in that higher world simply because they believe. Or they worship nature, mechanical nature, and they have a spirituality, again, that's trapped in this level, but believing because there's spirit behind everything, there's spirit behind mechanical nature, that they can just exist in paganism, and that is the path. But again, if they're not developing the vehicles to actually exist in the supernal worlds, then they're just going to remain trapped at the level that they are at. Our first comment of the day comes from To Be. And she asks, does having a low profile mean you're going to disappear soon? I'm not sure what you mean by having a low profile, and I'm not sure what you mean by going to disappear soon. But my short answer is no. But if you want a better answer than that, you'll have to elaborate on what you mean, because like a low profile in reference to what? A low public profile? Or, and what do you mean by you're going to disappear? Okay. I have in the past, oh, no, that's not right. All right. I have in the past showed you this. So I'll show it to you now. Whoops. So this is a meme that I made a while ago, talking about the circles of life or what I call the natures of nature, or the nature of natures. Doesn't matter how you say it. It's saying the same thing. And this above and below, and the idea of a surface, that there is a surface that separates, and yet these two natures are touching and overlapping. And as they touch and overlap, they create this thing that we call surface tension. So I just, looking back to the background in the water line. Now, you know that in ponds and whatnot, there are insects that can actually walk on water because of the surface tension of the water. Now, what surface tension is an accumulation of water molecules at the point where the water ceases and the atmosphere begins, the air begins. Because of the phenomenon known as evaporation, which I show here, the energy of the sun is exciting the water molecules and giving them greater energy. And they are becoming less dense. And as they become less dense, they rise, they become more buoyant in the water. And they are being drawn up out of the water into the air to become water vapor and eventually clouds. But to add to the humidity of the air, just floating around water molecules as part of that humidity. That's the process of evaporation. But as that process takes place, the final moments of a water molecule that's on the edge of being liquid water and becoming water vapor, we get this edge called the surface of the water. And as these molecules accumulate there, awaiting to break free of the rest of the water, there is enough mass, for lack of a better word. There are a bunch of water molecules amassing at the surface, right? So there is enough mass there that some very cleverly created or evolved insects can actually walk on that surface. Mosquitoes can do it, and water bugs. And there's some others that I can't. Their name doesn't come to me, but this tension, this surface tension, and this amassing represents what in esotericism we call the razor's edge. And this is the point at which we ask ourselves the question, to be or not to be. Will we rise into the heavens, right? Take our place among the clouds? Or will we return back down into the depths as we are swept up in the undercurrents, right? And the razor's edge is this moment and every moment, to be or not to be. And it is the sum total of our free will. There is no free will beyond that axiom and that question. And the point of the Hermetic principle, as above, so below, is to emphasize that there is a way of being in mechanical nature in such a way that we are not of it. So that we can be as above, so below, despite the fact that we have this physical body and this personality and everything that has no resemblance to our higher self. Awaken in the astral plane and ask to see your higher self. Ask to see how you really are. And you can verify this. When you see your higher self, you're not going to be looking in a mirror. You may be startled. You may not like what you see. But how many people, if you play a video game that lets you design your own character, how many of you would make the in-game character look exactly like you? This fact is important to comprehend. It's not enough really just to understand it. Because the point of mechanical nature, the point of that beneath the surface, the water wants to be one with water, right? And as I was, showing in the meme, you have these undercurrents, you have these water from the surface. If it starts to go down, then the further it goes down, the further away from the sun it gets, the cooler it gets, and the deeper it gets, and the more dense it becomes. And that is very, very similar to what happens in the infernal worlds. When we talk about enlightenment, we're not talking just about the light, but we're also talking about density. So enlightenment is to lighten up and to fall in the downward spiral of ego, deeper and deeper into mechanical nature, deeper and deeper into desire. You're falling deeper and deeper you go, the greater the weight that you will feel on your shoulders. And anyone who suffers from any sort of addiction or mental illness, or they're carrying the burdens, psychological burdens, emotional burdens, they feel that. You feel that weighing down on you. We use this language to describe these states. But that is the natural cycle that happens, right, in that lower nature. It's true for water, and it's true for psychological hell, that which we call hell. Because the deeper you go, the denser everything becomes. And you feel that weight on your heart, on your mind, weighing you down. And for many people, if they turn to, for instance, food as their drug of choice to medicate themselves, then what you end up seeing happen is that their physical stature, their physical bodies begin to exhibit and display and embody the dominant characteristic that their psychology is experiencing, which is what? Which is being overweight. And now we see that axiom, as above, so below, come back into play. Because the physical body is a reflection of the internal worlds. But if someone is trapped in the infernal worlds, in the depths, and they are feeling all of that weight, all of that mass on their weighing them down, that psychology wants to express on the surface. And so it can express through morbid obesity. So that the mass, the weight of those egos exhibit their influence and exhibit themselves, their nature, on the surface. And the same is true in the other direction. Because if we become lighter in our disposition, our heart becomes lighter and our psychology becomes lighter. We're not weighed down by all this fear and anxiety and depression and worry and anger and lust and greed and all of these psychological aggregates. If they're not weighing us down and dragging us down deeper into the depths, then we have this buoyancy, this lightness about us that allows us to rise higher and experience more of our divine nature. And as we experience more of our divine nature, we have the capacity, we have the ability to exhibit and express more of our divine nature here on the surface. And at any given point in time, we are being pulled in either direction. Just like those water molecules on the surface. We have the undercurrents of the water drawing us down from the surface back into the depths. And we have the sun, the light, shining and giving us the energy and the strength and the fearlessness, the courage to break free of our bonds, to break free of the collective, of being one with nature and choosing instead to be one with God, to be one with our higher self, to be one with divine nature. And every moment of every day, we are presented with a choice to be or not to be. And just like the seed that sprouts, and we call it a sprout, we have the ability to be being. In other words, experience being and our higher self, which is our being. The being in human being, in other words. So This matter of the number 13 again, it's described how if you take 365 and let's do this quickly. It's 365. Oops, no, that's not right. Here, I'll show this on the screen here. Say 365. Why is this not working? Okay, 365 and divided by 13. Yeah, so yeah, every month would have 28 days exactly, and when you divide, if you divide this by 4, yeah, you get 7 days. So there would be exactly 4 weeks of 7 days in each week, and so the argument is that if we use 13 instead of 12, we would have exactly 28 days in every month, and that the first of the month would always, start on a Sunday or Monday or however we structured it, and that we would have this uniformity across the entire year. And the arguments for 13 actually go beyond that, because they say there's actually 13 constellations, not 12. And that here I have an entire laundry list of stuff that they say. That's not here. I made it bigger here. That that the moon travels 13 degrees across the sky each day, that there's 13 weeks in each of the 4 seasons. Let's see what else. 13 represents the end of a cycle and the rebirth for a new cycle. 13 weeks between equinoxes and solstices. 13 is a powerful number in nature and spirit. 13 is the only teen number in the Fibonacci sequence. In religion, it's see, now this is where they start to conflate things, because they say Jesus had 12 disciples, making 13 of them, meaning he was the 13th. And that, but then they next say Buddha had 13 disciples. And Islam has a prophet and 12 imams, making 13. They claim we have 13 chakras, not 7. We actually have way more chakras than 13. We're talking about the major chakras, the chakras along the spinal column. There's chakras all over the body. So depending on how you count it, you can count 13 into whatever. You can read 13 into whatever you want. It says 13 is a prime number, incorruptible in nature, 13 major joints of the body, 12 constellations around our sun, making 13. So they keep pointing this out, and that 13 is the most powerful number in observable nature. I don't know where they get that from. I just like to point out the following, that 1 plus 3 equals 4. One plus 2 equals 3. 3, let's say 3 plus 4 equals 7. Why is that important? Because 4 are the 4 elements. And the 4 directions, also known as the 4 cardinal points, but I'm not going to write that out. Right? North, south, east, west, in other words. And there's lots of other things that fall into the number 4. But 3, 1 plus 2 equals 3. 3 is the Trinity. And when you add 3 and 4 together, you get 7. Let's say 3 is the creative law of the universe, and 7 is the organizational law. law of the universe. 3 plus 7 equals 10, which is the 1 and the 0, the all and the nothing. In other words, this is the problem with binary mechanical rational mind. It says we're wrong to use 12 because 13 is the perfect number, and they give all this rationale for why, including the whole thing about all the months perfectly divided and everything is nicely, neatly organized and structured, and right, and there's no variability. It's like perfect, like an A-type personality wants there to be 13 months because they see perfection in it. And yet in the organizational law that we live by, there's 7 notes, 7 octaves, 7 primary colors. There are 7 dimensions. There are 7 primary chakras. There's no way that you can conveniently get 7 to fit into 13. You have to add 4 to 7 to get 13. So in other words, 13 minus, yeah, I did get that right. Yeah, okay. So this is what happens when you conflate divine nature and mechanical nature. You get all sorts of contradictions and messiness that now you have to argue this way or that way in a binary way. The moon governs mechanical nature. And all the points that they're making about 13's relationship, to the seasons and menstrual cycles and so on and so forth. These are all related to mechanical nature. But then they want to take the extra step and say, oh, but there's 12 constellations, but they're going around the sun, so that's 13 too. But constellations are not like the sun. The Christ is actually consists of the 12. It's not an additional one that you add to. The Christ emerges from the 12. It's you add the 12 together. You add the 1 and the 2 to get 3. The Trinity, the triunity, the creative force of the universe, the law of 3. So we can't argue that we wouldn't have a much more convenient calendar if every month had 28 days. It would be more convenient. It would be more regular. It would be more lots of things that the mind would want, that the mind wants. So somebody somewhere could have set it up that way, but they didn't. There's a reason why you want variability because the A-type personality, the machine, remember a few weeks back I was talking about the various different words related, to the Tao and the unfolding of above and below, and I was talking about inertia. It's the second law of motion. Things at rest prefer to stay at rest, and things that move prefer to keep moving. And a machine that once it's established and set up, It does not want to change. Mechanical nature does not like change. That's why evolution in mechanical nature happens relatively slowly. There are these cyclical aspects of mechanical nature, but the cyclical aspect of it, the cycle, builds in that predictability, that mechanicity, that reliability that mechanical nature is so fond of. It's like inertia. It doesn't like change. It wants to stay the same. But divine nature at its very core, at its very essence, seeks evolution. It seeks to change all the time. Divine nature is an anathema to mechanicity. Just take this test of yourself. And, we've been going through these so-called culture wars with the wokeness and whatnot. But even if you don't want to go there, just look what has happened to your so-called entertainment or the arts. Let's just call it cinematic arts, for lack of a better word, cinema. Since the advent of streaming and the focus on generating content, when was the last time you went to the cinema or watched something on Netflix or Prime or any streaming service you subscribe to? When was the last time you watched a new movie that moved you to tears, that moved you heart and soul? And if you enjoy movies and like movies, which movies in your list of top 10 movies would you say that you love? How many of those movies were from the past decade? And then you ask yourself, why? And the same thing can be said for music. What music do you hear being made today that moves your soul? And why is there so little of it? If, like me, you grew up the 70s and 80s, and we were listening, obviously, to what came before, yes, but particularly what maybe was made in the 70s and 80s. And if people asked me to make a list of my top 10 favorite songs, I couldn't do it. The list is way longer than that. And there are songs that will bring a tear to my eye to this day. And not because I have any sort of attachment or identification to the songs or the bands or any. There are songs that move me to tears. I don't even own the band's album. I don't even own the song on CD or anything. It's just if I hear it, it'll move me to tears. Has a gangster rap or a hip hop song ever moved you to tears? In other words, the so-called entertainment that's being churned out these days as content, it's like they're stamping out just industrial copies of copies of copies of copies of copies. And what's worse is now the advent of AI. I challenge anybody out there anywhere to make an AI produced, I don't care what it is. It could be a story, a poem, an image, a movie. It doesn't matter. You get an AI to generate something that'll move me to tears, and I'll eat my words. I will eat this microphone. I prophesy that I will never have to eat this microphone. Because as Benjamin points out here in the following comment, he says, I believe the entertainment industry has lost its edge. Most media today are remakes of older content, including music, movies, etc. Yeah, it's heartless, it's soulless, it's cynical, money grabbing. It's, to use an economic term, we have witnessed the commodification of the arts. And if you're familiar with the economics concept of a commodity, and what's the difference between a commodity and a product? A product is a specialized, unique, one-off. It's unique. It's special. It's different. A commodity is more or less like every other thing. You can't tell the difference. So we don't have different brands of potatoes. We have different producers of potatoes. And nowadays, at least, they put their labels on things, and you have different varieties of potatoes in terms of, there are russet potatoes, there are golden, there are yellow flesh, and so on and so forth. So there's some differentiation in there. But the point is within these vertical categories, like i.e. russet potatoes, there are no, you go and you pay by the pound. It's a commodity. You pay by the weight. Oil is a commodity. Milk, eggs, these are commodities. You don't pay more or less for eggs because they came from this farm or that farm, unless of course one is organic. But again, we're splitting hairs here. The point is it's not the same as buying a Buick or a Toyota, right? You cannot say that all cars are the same. There are classes of vehicle, and for example, the subcompact class or the compact class, each manufacturer makes their own version of that class of vehicle. Pickup trucks may be a better example. And there are distinguishable, notable differences between a Toyota pickup truck and a Chevy and a Ford and so on and so forth. And this is what companies compete on. They compete on those differences because they're bona fide products. But in a commodity market, everything is considered to be the same. There's no difference. And you as a farmer, when you sell your potatoes, if they're, just plain Jane yellow flesh potatoes, you don't get to sell your potatoes for more money on the open market. You have to sell your potatoes at where the market has priced potatoes for that day, because it's a commodity. And that's all well and good for agricultural goods and oil and so on and so forth. But the commodification of art, the commodification of culture, where now everything is, where it's just content, it's just like a slurry of hypnotic, time-consuming, mind-occupying activity. It's like, you could potentially argue that junk food is like a commodity. Well, or that fast food was like the commodification of the restaurant. Even though the different fast food chains try to have some kind of differentiation between them, and they try to compete on various different factors. But the truth is that a fast food burger is more or less a fast food burger, and fast food French fries are just, and so you don't go to a fast food restaurant, you know, to hold your wedding reception, or you don't take your significant other to McDonald's on your anniversary. Why? Because you're not going to get anything special. And nowadays, it seems, certainly the younger generations, they don't go to the movies. They don't date. They don't take their date to the movies. Why? Because it's like there's nothing special to see. It used to be that you could take your significant other to the movies, and together you could share in some kind of an emotional experience or a moving experience. You could share that experience together. I mean, going to the movies was a dating ritual for decades. But young people don't do that anymore. And I don't, and it doesn't surprise me that they don't, because they would just sit there and just consuming this garbage content. It's not stimulating in any way. It's certainly not moving to the heart. And a young couple who are, interested in one another and trying to open their hearts up to each other, well, going to see some crappy movie together is not going to do it. It's not going to help anyway. Leah says, nothing new under the sun. No, these days, especially not. So there's a repetitive aspect to mechanical nature and the mind and the neatness, the perfection of what the A-type personality wants, and what the mind and what corporation behind such commodification wants, which is consistency. So, for instance, you go to a McDonald's anywhere in the world, and you're pretty much guaranteed to be able to buy a hamburger and a French fries and a Coke that more or less is the same as your McDonald's back home. And generally speaking, they will have restroom facilities that are more or less within a certain set of parameters, more or less abiding by a certain set standard of cleanliness. So when you are traveling in a foreign land and you are in an area where you're unfamiliar with the people, you don't speak the language, you're unfamiliar with the food, or who knows what, or maybe you have a bug, or maybe you have some gastrointestinal distress, which is very, very, very common when you travel. And the more exotic locales you travel in, the more likely you will experience some kind of gastrointestinal discomfort, not because there's anything particularly wrong about the area that you are in, but the fact of the matter is that you will be exposed to bacteria that your body is simply not used to. It'll be you are just susceptible to foreign invaders in the food that you eat and so on, that you just might be very, very sensitive to, because you've never been exposed to them before. So one of the benefits of McDonald's is that you're a stranger in a strange land, and you're starving, but you're afraid of getting the local fare because it made you sick the last time or the first time you tried it. And so you see the golden arches and you're like, hallelujah, at least here you're pretty sure and you can get something familiar, that it doesn't matter if it's healthy, when you're starving, when you're really hungry, or and you really need to use the washroom and you're looking for a relatively clean washroom experience. The golden arches really can be like a little sanctuary in a being a stranger in a strange land in a foreign country where everything else is kind of alien. You're the one who is alien, but you know what I mean. It's all relative. So, but it's that consistency and reliability, that the familiarity of it, that we look for, as that's our mechanical self. That's our lower self, right? Who's seeking something familiar. When you're in a far off land and everything's different, now you want something that you've had 100 times or 1,000 times. You know what it's going to taste like. You know what it's going to do to you or not do to you, right? And you can get a nice, clean restroom experience. These are desires. And these are desires related to comfort and security. These are desires related to controlling your experience and to control the outcome of that experience, to have some semblance of control on the outcome of this particular meal. It's like, okay, it's junk food, it's garbage food. Yeah, okay, I get that. But I have a good deal of certainty that it's not going to make me sick. I have a good deal of certainty that it's gonna fill me up. I have a good deal of certainty that when I go use the washroom, it won't be a disaster. So that is precisely the value proposition of the chain restaurant, right? When you really get right down to it, chain restaurants, they really don't have any other value proposition, because you are almost certain to be able to get better food elsewhere. You're not going for the quality of the food. You're not going for, you might be going, well, it used to be that you went for the price, right? Because, I mean, someone posted something just today. I saw someone had posted a photograph of the McDonald's menu in 1972. Yeah, Big Macs were 65 cents, right? A milk was 35 cents and a soda was 15 cents and stuff. So it was like, so when McDonald's was relatively new, they had a value proposition where you could actually eat fairly well, take your family and eat fairly well, and it was dirt cheap. Those times are long gone. I mean, I don't know. I don't eat at fast food, those kinds of fast food joints these days, but certainly it's nowhere near, maybe relative to other restaurants, it's still maybe relatively cheap, but it's still not that cheap. So, but it's that familiarity, right? You know that if you go into a Popeyes or a Kentucky Fried Chicken or a Taco Bell, like for example, I was mentioning like gastrointestinal difficulties. You know that if you're going to a Taco Bell, later you're going to have gastrointestinal difficulties, right? So that's like almost a guarantee. So you know what you're getting into, in other words. But none of this stuff is soul food. None of this stuff moves the soul, right? And if you're a stranger in a strange land and you're traveling, if you go deep into your self and consciously comprehend why you are there, 9 times out of 10, you will go for the local food. It's only if you're afraid of getting sick or if you've gotten sick, and then maybe even you might get some instruction that, hey, listen, you'll just be better off going and get something familiar this time. And then you can go back to being adventurous and trying new things tomorrow. But the point is that there are two natures, and we have both of those natures inside of us. That's hopefully by now, right? You will see that so clearly, even just talking about like silly things, that sometimes, yeah, if you're like me, sometimes you'll get a craving for some junk food. And you know that if you have that one Dorito, you're going to have 50 or the rest of the bag, right? Because you can't stop, because it's designed that way. It's designed to be that way. So that's a part of us. We can't escape the fact here and now that while we're in the matrix, our bodies are part of the matrix. Our personality is part of the matrix. Our conditioning, we've been conditioned by the matrix to behave certain ways. That's our lower animal nature. And then deeper in our psyche, we have these egos, we have these desires, and we have these defects and vices that we have to deal with that, of course, are trying to keep us trapped in the matrix. And they're going to want us to behave in those ways that keep us in the undercurrents, right? That keep us in the density, that keep us as fish, that keep us as mermaids, to use the Little Mermaid analogy, right? That's that aspect of our nature. Or rather, that's one of our natures, our lower nature, the aspect of us that is that lower nature. But man cannot live on bread alone. What does that mean? Man cannot live on bread alone. I just basically outlined, right? Everything I talk about, that's bread, right? Like Wonder Bread, right? It's like, but it's right there in the Bible, right? Man cannot live on bread alone, because what else does he need? Because our divine nature also needs nourishment. A man is not just a body. A human is not just a mind and emotions and sensations. A human is a human being. And the man in human doesn't mean male, it means manas. Manas, as in manna, as in manna from heaven. So there's bread, which in many languages is also called manna, but then there's manas, or manna from heaven. And in the Lord's Prayer, we pray, give us this day our daily bread. Well, that has a double meaning. On the one hand, you can say that it means give us this day our sustenance, our food, the bread that we need to survive. But at the same time, because we're praying to God and it's the Lord's Prayer, the deeper meaning of that is give us this day our manna from heaven, what will nourish us, what will nourish our soul. Because we need nourishment to be able to build our solar bodies, the human soul, our divine vehicle. In the same way that we need physical bread, physical food, to be able to nourish our physical body, which is our physical vehicle, our physical vessel. So the two natures have natures. And as above, so below, right? We need food, but we also need soul food. And I've done live streams in the past about the transformation of impressions and being able to comprehend impressions as food, so that as we go through life in the experience of life, we have the experiences on the physical level, on the sensory level, on the emotional level, on the intellectual level. Yes. And we take in impressions through our three bodies and our three brains and our five centers. But do we digest those impressions? Do we digest them consciously in order to feed our solar bodies, our solar astral, our solar mental, our solar vital bodies? And do we exercise our causal body, the body of willpower, in the experience of those impressions and in the transformation of those impressions, so that we are actually bodybuilding our causal body? We're building our willpower. So coming back to that terrible example of the dreaded bag of Doritos, can we eat 7 or 8 or maybe 10 Doritos and close up the bag and put a chip clip on it and put it back in the cupboard? Can we do that? Takes a lot of willpower. Or when you're at a all-you-can-eat buffet, or when you're at a Christmas party and somebody has an elaborate spread and there's cookies and chocolate and cake and all kinds of stuff there, can we enjoy, but in moderation? Just a little bit here and a little bit there. And then look, I know the second slice of cheesecake is calling out to you, right? Or the red velvet cake or the black forest cake or whatever it may be for you, whatever does it for you, it's calling out to you. But can we exercise our willpower? Can we flex our muscles there and say, no, you know what? I have a little bit of this and a little bit of this, and that's enough. So, as above, so below. But the two things are related to each other, and they mirror one another in a way, but they're not the same. And they're not exactly the same. And the natures of nature are not the same. There are differences. And in many ways, they're complementary, and in many other ways, they're the opposite. They're contradictory, in other words. And in some cases, they're compulsory and the same. But it's on a case by case basis. Leah says, she says, I haven't eaten in 24 hours. I broke down and made coffee because I was having a caffeine withdrawal headache. Is water fasting a bad idea? So you were fasting, you were just taking in water? No, it's not a bad idea. Yeah, it might have been a bad idea to start a water fast the day before you heard me talking about food for an hour. But how could you have known that, right? How could you have known I was going to be talking about food of all things, and McDonald's and all that nonsense? But no, I went on a fast last month for 4 days, and all I had was water. But I mean, you can have coffee. Coffee won't break your fast. Just don't put any cream or sugar in it. It won't break your fast. In fact, coffee can help on a fast because now I have decaffeinated coffee. I'm not big into the caffeine, or I have half calf. but there are certain liquids that you can drink that help with hunger. And I believe coffee is one of them. That if you drink black coffee, it'll help with the hunger, but it won't break your fast. Again, unless you put cream and sugar in it. And even there are some people who will say you can put cream in your coffee and that won't break your fast. But the problem is they don't specify that it has to be whole cream. It has to be like 35% or higher cream. Because if you use the 10% cream, that has milk in there, and the milk and the sugar and the protein is going to break your fast. The reason why they say that fat won't break your fast and why you can have cream in your coffee is because it'll keep you in ketosis. However, that's fine if you're fasting for purely physical reasons, for weight loss reasons, for example. But from a spiritual perspective, you don't want to have anything but water, really, on your fast. Now, I've never done a fast where you also don't drink water. I have known people who have done that, and I have never done that myself, namely because I would be concerned with my other medical condition that might it might trigger some seizures if I put too much stress on the body for an extended period of time. I just don't know what not drinking water for 3 or 4 days and not eating food will do. So, and I've yet to see any information that, I've yet to get any experience. Like I said, I've known people who've done it, but I've yet to get any feedback from someone who has epilepsy that they've done a 3 or 4 day fast without water. So, but yeah, so if that's what you call water fasting, like, see, this is why I'm, if you now have broke down and had coffee, that's fine. But when you say you were water fasting, does that mean you were also not having water? That's what was not clear to me. That's why I brought it up. All right. Well, this brings us to ultimately the real difference. Oh, okay. And she clarified, I was drinking water only. Okay. So I would just call that a fast. You were fasting, right? And because if you say it's a water fast, to me, that means you were fasting from water in addition to food. But again, that's just, you maybe that's my misunderstanding, right? Maybe just that's how my mind works. Because under normal circumstances, if you say I'm fasting, it means I'm fasting from food, right? So in classical fasting, it's sort of a given that you drink water. It's a given. Mind you, some people have told me that it's the opposite. That normal fasting, it's a given that you have neither water nor food. So I don't know. It's like, and if you try to look this stuff up on the internet, you get 50 different explanations, and everybody has a different opinion, and everybody says that their opinion is right. So it's one of these phenomenon that fasting is thousands of years old as a tradition, and it has roots in every religion and spiritual tradition around the world has practiced fasting in one form or another, including in modern day, present day Islam, especially during Ramadan. And we are in Ramadan, if I'm not mistaken. And in Ramadan, they fast from sun up to sundown. That's how their tradition practices it. So, but yeah. So if you drink water, you can fast for, as long as you can go. But I wouldn't try doing too much all at once. So if you've never fasted before, start with like 24 hours, and then maybe the next week, or give yourself a certain cushion, and then the next time try going to 48 hours. And then the next time try to go for 3 days, and so on and so forth. But give yourself time between fasts, like at least a week, to let your body recover. And the longer fasts that you do, the more recovery time that you need. So if you do a 3 or 4 day fast, I wouldn't try fasting again until the next month. And Leah says, I've only ever made it to 4 days. I want to try 7, but I'm listening to my body. Another thing about fasting is that depending on your age and your musculature and how often you lift weights, fasting can have a detrimental effect on our strength and our muscle density and our bone density if we fast too often for too long. So personally, like you, Leah, I've never gone, I think I've gone 5 days, but I've never gone to 7 days. I don't particularly feel a need to do it. And I also find that, like, if I go back to lifting weights after a fast, I've lost a tremendous amount of strength. And I think it might be something peculiar to me or with my condition. I'm not sure, because of the strain on the nervous system. But sarcopenia is not something that I take lightly. Sarcopenia is the atrophy, the shrinking of the muscles. That is something that I don't take lightly as an individual. So I see no reason to have to fast for 7 days. If you can do it, great. I would just be sure that you don't do it very often, and that if you do, in between, that you're getting regular exercise, but not just cardio, but you're actually doing resistance training, and that you're recovering the muscle that you lose on the fast. That would be my recommendation. When it comes to the natures of our two natures, there is one defining element that is perhaps the most important, certainly from a spiritual perspective. And that is the situation relating to the self. Divine nature is selfless. So in Buddhism, they just simply refer to as no self. But it's selfless. Divine nature is where we get our impulses to help others, to give of ourselves, to sacrifice, to put others ahead of us, etc. The nature of mechanical nature is the opposite of that. So mechanical nature is by definition selfish. And it has to be that way. It needs to be that way. Because mechanical nature couldn't work otherwise. The lioness hunting on the Serengeti must choose her well-being and the well-being of her cubs over the well-being of the zebra. Now, no matter how you slice it, feeding yourself and your offspring is a selfish act. It's longevity of the self, it's longevity of your line, of your species, but also of your bloodline. That's an innate instinct in certainly nearly all mammals, but also all creatures in general. Survival of the individual and survival of the species. And if that means having to eat another animal, then so be it. That's the law of the jungle, right? Only the strong survive, and the strong cull the weak, and that's what feeds mechanical evolution. As the stronger genes, the stronger gene pools prevail, and the weaker ones are eliminated, and they're eliminated from the gene pool. That's that Darwinian model of evolution, which has its place, but it's only a small fraction of the picture. But there's no way to look at mechanical nature and say it's that on an individual level that it doesn't have selfishness built into it. Now, you could also argue that sacrifice is all throughout nature, but that sacrifice is the metaphysical level, the divine nature that's behind or beneath the nature that we experience. Behind is better. Well, it's really above, but can get really we can talk ourselves into an intellectual conundrum when we try to talk about this stuff, because it's really within. It's neither above or below or behind, or it's within. So there are sacrifices, because in fact, that zebra has a monad. And the zebra being eaten by the lioness and fed to the cubs, the monad is making a sacrifice. The monad of the zebra is making a sacrifice for the monad of the lioness and the monads of her cubs. But in the moment that the lioness is chasing down that zebra is trying to get away. So there's just fear and the fight or flight instinct, right? So the zebra is like, get away from the lion. This is something that I do not understand, how those who worship mechanical nature and worship Gaia and all of this stuff, the pagans, I don't know how they get around this. Only that they must be attributing selflessness to mechanical nature. It's the only answer. Either that, or they don't really know the nature of their own divine nature, and they don't understand spirituality. Because the nature of the higher self, the divine nature, its nature is selflessness. And in the absence of that knowledge, that to me is the only reason why someone can turn around and worship nature. Because, well, the plant, it's like even the Native North American First Nations, who on the plains or whatever would when they were hunting buffalo, they would give thanks and praise to the spirit of the buffalo for giving its life for them. So they're honoring, in that moment, they're honoring the monad or the spirit of the buffalo. They're honoring divine nature. They must be. But there's no, it's a conflation. It's like the post about the number 13, where they're talking about divine nature in one point and then mechanical nature in the other point, and they overlap the two, and there's no separation. There's no distinction. And if someone can't make that distinction, if they have no discernment, they assume that the two are one, then that's how you end up with this conflation where they're applying the characteristics of one to the nature of the other. And that's simply not the case. But that's how you can run into all sorts of problems, one chief of which is the overuse of psychedelics, the ongoing use of psychedelics. And people believe that they're going into these supernal worlds. And they believe that they are awakening their consciousness by taking these substances. But it's simply not true. And it's a shame, because when you try to impress upon individuals who are identified and attached to their nature worship, when you try to get across to them, right, the nature of natures, the distinction between the two, and the importance of having the discernment between the two, particularly in ourselves, but also in others and in all of these so-called spiritual substances, psychedelics, and so on. Their resistance, their reaction, and their resistance reveals a tremendous selfishness, identification, and attachment. No. No. That may be true for other people. That's not true for me. I know what I know. I know that this and that, and I'm not going to give up doing my mushrooms, or I know this, and I know this about DMT and ayahuasca and so on and so forth. And it's like, then you begin to realize it's, for them, it's like, it's like an addiction. And they'll tell you it isn't. But it is. If they can't stop, then what else is it? I say, well, I don't want to stop. Well, I don't want to stop. Who is the I that's making that statement? What is it within you that does not want to stop? I don't want to stop. Does that sound like something your being would say? Your innermost being, your higher self? And is the spirit of the sentiment, the spirit of that phrase, the spirit of that words, those words uttered in that way, or is that coming from an ego? Well, that really derails them, and that really doesn't. that's when they cut you off. They don't want to hear anymore. But this is where so much of humanity is caught in a terrible trap, where this overlap and where this confluence and where their inability to discern their two natures and their inabilities to know themselves, look within themselves, and know that, okay, I know this is a desire, I know that's a desire, but this I know is something else. This is this other thing, this intuition, this inspiration. This is coming from my divine nature. Because mechanical nature's job is to oppose, obstruct, corrupt, and make fall our divine nature. Nature's job is to hypnotize and imprison us. That's part of the game. Remember, way back when I did a live stream talking about escape rooms and how the escape room and talking about the movie Shawshank Redemption and why it's one of the most beloved movies ever made. Why? Because an escape route or Shawshank Redemption, Shawshank Prison, may be the perfect allegory for life and for spiritual development. Leah asks, it's contradicting each nature. Was this in reference to psychedelics? I'm not sure. So what's contradicting each nature? Was it psychedelics? That's an interesting question. Like, is there something that goes against both natures? Yes. She goes, okay, so psychedelics, is it contradicting each nature? How does one answer this question? Because, look, a psychedelic creates an experience that is, well, there's no other way to, it's hypnotic. It's a hypnotic experience. It is an enticing experience. It is attractive. It is tempting. It's desirable. But if you think about mechanical nature, if you observe flowers, are they not beautiful? Are they not enticing? Do they not give off aromas and scents that are what? Precisely attractive for insects and hummingbirds and bees? And then if you think about birds, songbirds, and male birds and their elaborate courtship rituals, and it's usually male birds who are the ones who are more flamboyantly colored, because it's in birds, it's usually the males that have to attract the females. And there are birds that have like that dance and do all these, like, again, courtship rituals. Earlier I was talking about penguins. Male emperor penguins bring stones and present stones to the female. And if the female likes the stone that the penguin brought her, then she will agree to be his mate. And as best as I can tell, they mate for life. So mechanical nature is filled with these elaborate enticements and again, courtship rituals and so on. But then there are also the Venus flytrap, which gives off scents, and it's attracting an insect to fall into its trap. And there are many poisonous flowers that do the same thing. They give off substances that go out into the air, and these substances essentially hypnotize, but they attract the prey of these poisonous plants. One of them has just a pool of acid in its like cup like flower, and it gives off a scent, a very sweet smelling scent, and then if the insect goes down into the flower to try to get the nectar, it's actually discovers that there is no nectar there. It's actually the digestive juices of the plant, and the insect gets stuck in this sticky thing and gets digested by the plant. So on that level, the psychedelics that create for us this hypnotic fantasy illusion of that we are in the supernal world, that we are in heaven, or that we're in other dimensions, or having all these these fantastical out of body experiences, you can see how the pattern is the same. It's more elaborate, it's much more complex, but the fact of the matter is that whether we're talking about pheromones or that mechanical nature, it's built into mechanical nature to use substances to attract and win over other creatures, and to keep those creatures coming back to us. That is built into mechanical nature. You can see that playing out right across the whole spectrum. Plants and animals, you can see that playing out. So that is not contradictory to mechanical nature. What is contradictory about it to divine nature? Because she asked, okay, but how is it contradicting divine nature? Because you're asleep on psychedelics. You think you're awake. You feel like you're awake, but you're not. You're asleep. Or let me qualify that. Let me modify that. You are awake, but you are awake in the infernal dimensions. You are awake in psychological hell, but just beneath the surface, which is why you can have such fantastical experiences. So it's not contradictory in the sense that there is an awakening, but it is contradictory in the sense that it's awakening negatively. Now, in the case of ayahuasca, and what psychedelics can be used for in a positive way is when they're used as plant medicine to be able to show you that which you need to see. So ayahuasca can take you into deeper levels of hell. And I've talked many times about Dr. Gabor Mate, who is one of the preeminent psychologists in the world, psychiatrists in the world, dealing with addictions, severe addictions. And he uses ayahuasca to help his most severe addicts to be able to face and overcome the cause of their addictions. And let's face it, when you see the demon face to face, responsible for the self-loathing and everything else behind your addiction, you come out of that trip changed. Because for the you finally comprehend, you finally have seen the demon that is responsible for all of your suffering, for all your dependency on whatever it is that you're addicted to. So in that sense, as a medicine, it's also not contradictory. The beliefs around psychedelics, the beliefs that people have, the erroneous beliefs that they have, that they are going into the supernal worlds on psychedelics and that they're awakening their consciousness if they use them more and more and more and more, that is contradictory to the truth, because belief is not the truth. Belief is illusion, right? It's delusion of the mind. But that's contradictory only to divine nature. To mechanical nature, I suppose you could say it's contradictory in as far as mechanical nature offers on a certain degree of objective reality. But then again, from a Gnostic point of view or from a spiritual point of view, that it's all illusion anyway. So I don't know if that answered your question, Leah, but it's a challenging question because the way you worded it is, are psychedelics contradicting each nature? Considering that all of mechanical nature is itself an illusion, then the answer is no, it's not contradicting. It's not contradictory to mechanical nature. And as I described, because all of mechanical nature works on illusion and delusion. So, oh, Leah says, okay, yes, thank you. Right. Yeah, but again, it's a good question. And next time somebody starts arguing in favor of psychedelics, I think I'll remember the answer that, that I gave today, because I think it's very telling. The trouble is that it's very hard to convince someone that their hallucinations were real, that they weren't real, that they were actually hallucinations. So that's the problem with psychedelics. These are very powerful. They can create very, very powerful illusions. And then the argument is, well, you say that it can actually reveal a demon. So I need a moment of a break. Does anybody have any questions? I think we might wrap up today a little bit early. We've been going for 2 hours, but we might wrap up a little bit early. But I'm, of course, open to any questions at this time if you have them. What I was going to say was, how can a psychedelic reveal a demon to you, and that's real, but everything else it shows you is not real? And the simple answer is that the demon it's revealing to you is just deeper in hell. Everything it's showing to you is the first couple levels of hell. In Catholicism, they call it limbo or purgatory, right? But the demons are real. But what your mind creates, right? It's like the lunar astral plane. It's like when you dream. But just because you awaken in the astral plane doesn't mean that you're in the solar astral plane. You can be in the lunar astral plane. You can still be caught up in your ego. You're awake and you feel like you're out of your body. You feel like you're lucid dreaming, but that doesn't mean you're in the solar astral plane. So many people who just do astral travel, they're traveling in the lunar astral plane. That's all the psychedelic accomplishes. Benjamin says, is it easy to access our divine nature, or are we conditioned to oppose access to our divine nature? So this, of course, is a very good question. This humanity is on average about 97% ego, right? So we have very little free consciousness available to us. We access our divine nature via free consciousness because consciousness is part of our divine nature. So to access our divine nature, step one is to observe and be aware that you are observing. So that's why we always emphasize self-observation and self-remembering. Because if you observe yourself and identify not with what you are observing, but with the observer, then it is the consciousness that is observing. He's saying, okay, so that the very fact that I can observe it comes from my divine nature. You compare that to a machine, like a little robot that just reacts mechanically to everything, or like an insect, which is very, very mechanical, like ants. Ants are notoriously mechanical creatures. And yes, they have their antenna, and yes, they have certain limited perception, but really, frankly, ants are so mechanical. The reason why you get one ant in your house, and next thing you know, you're killing ants for the next month, and they don't stop coming. It's because everywhere an ant goes, it leaves a trail of urine, little droplets of urine, and then the other ants follow that trail of urine, and they're just so mechanical, right? They're like little machines. They just do according to this mechanical programmed instinct. That's mechanical nature, right? So when you're going through the motions of whatever it is that you do, let's say your morning ritual or your evening ritual or whatever, preparing dinner or brushing your teeth or any type of this type of activity, are you present and aware and observing yourself? Or do you just mechanically go through the motions and your mind is wandering elsewhere? So consciousness is the key. It is the medium. It is the key to knowing our divine nature. And it is also the medium, the bandwidth through which we can receive information from our divine nature. And we have intuition, and we also have heart, the superior emotional center. When you feel love for someone, not lust, but genuine love, like when you feel love for a sibling or mother or father or a child, and you feel the need, the impulse to act selflessly, sacrificially. When you have these genuine feelings and impulses of selflessness, you are experiencing your divine nature. When you ask, is it easy? It really depends on your level of being, on your level of consciousness. Because I can tell you that it becomes easier the more you do it, the more you practice, right? But there's an expression, practice makes perfect. And there's another expression that says, when something becomes second nature, you've practiced it so much, you've done it so often, it now becomes second nature. And since we're talking about having multiple natures, when you begin to rely on your divine nature for guidance, it sometimes makes life more difficult, and it makes life very confusing for your loved ones, the people around you that cannot understand and cannot comprehend what you're doing and why you're doing it and who told you to do that. And you just, for whatever reason, you can't explain it to them that you're doing what your innermost being told you to do. So in some senses, life becomes harder, but the more you connect to your higher self, the more you practice observing yourself, remembering yourself, meditating, working on your egos, observing your egos, eliminating your egos, comprehending them in meditation. The more free consciousness you liberate, the greater the bandwidth between you and your higher self. And the greater the bandwidth, the more information you can receive. In other words, the more you can access your divine nature. But the more of your divine nature you access, the more of your lower nature you have to be willing to sacrifice. You have to be willing to let go of. Because the one comes at the expense of the other. Because the consciousness is bottled up inside the ego. So as you shrink one, the other can grow. But as you do so, anyone around you that's still very much identified with ego or caught up with ego or working from that level of consciousness, mechanical ego consciousness, they will find you and what you do that much more enigmatic and strange. Benjamin says, 97% of the time during my morning ritual, my mind wanders as I prepare for work. You're right. When we're not paying attention, we can behave like ants, very industrious, but focused on the future. Thank you so much for your insights. I'm becoming more aware of this now. Yeah, well, we all do it. I mean, we all do it, Benjamin. It's the real big one is when you're driving down the highway and you snap out of it and you realize, oh my God, I just missed my exit, right? Or you've traveled 50 miles down the highway and you have no memory of the last 50 miles. It's we're on autopilot, right? That's our mechanical nature is very efficient. It can get a lot done without us being there. Honestly, truthfully, right? Like you said, we can be very industrious. We can get a lot done and not even be paying attention to what we're doing. It's because we have multiple brains, right? We have our motor, physical, and motor, instinctive, sexual center, our emotion center, our mental center, and a lot of the a lot of stuff that we do, we can do with muscle memory. And we can be wandering, our mind can be wandering, thinking about the future, the past, whatever. And, we can be washing dishes or doing whatever it is we're doing, and not really be present. But divine nature, which is always there in the background, within, if we can connect into that, and then we have a renewed perception and a deeper perception of our experience, and our experience itself becomes richer as a result. So, any more comments or questions for today? I think we're going to call it today. I think we're going to make it an early one. Last week we went 4 hours. We're not going 4 hours today. That's for sure. There's lots of interesting stuff happening on the world stage, and you can witness humanity becoming more mechanical and doubling down on mechanicity and technology and the tit for tat binary conflicts that are popping up. Everything from trade wars, right, tariffs, to physical wars, and it's but as much as that's happening out in the world, don't forget what's happening inside of you. That's the war that we all need to be fighting, right? We all of us are generals in our own war. So no matter what's happening out there, that's fine. Let it happen. It's going to happen with or without you. So focus on what when Jordan Peterson would say, cleaning your room. Focus on your own room, right? Focus on your own household. Focus on your own country, your own nation, your own temple, right? That's you. And nobody else can do that for you, and nobody else is going to invade you, and nobody else is going to take it away from you, right? So no matter what's happening out there, let it happen. It's going to happen whether we like it or not. With or without us, it's going to happen. But that doesn't mean we have to let it affect us in our internal world, in our internal landscape, in our internal temple. That's a sacred space. That's our space. And we can focus on cleansing it and keeping it a sacred space for what? For our divine nature to occupy. And we can work on ourselves to also physically, to be in physical good shape, to be healthful, to eat healthy food, etc. And without becoming obsessed about what we look like, or we don't have to run marathons or we don't have to be triathletes or anything like that. It's just another one of these things that mechanical nature is going to be going haywire, and there's going to be a temptation from within for us to participate in that, for us to go crazy. Like, you have seen, surely you have heard that there are people going around in the United States who are vandalizing Teslas and Tesla dealerships and charging stations. They've lit Teslas on fire. They've thrown Molotov cocktails through the windows of Tesla dealerships. They've blown up Tesla charging stations. And why? Because they don't like what Elon Musk is doing. They don't like that Elon Musk went to go work for Donald Trump. And there are people going around spraying swastikas on Teslas and all sorts, right? This is not the work of their higher self. This is not the work of divine nature. Hopefully, I don't have to say that. Hopefully, that's self-evident. So, but I emphasize that these people, their mechanical nature, their internal mechanical nature, is being stimulated and is being triggered by what's happening in mechanical nature out there, and the vibrations, the whatever octave, whatever frequencies are that vibe, that wavelength is on, that's triggering them to want to synchronize and participate, right? Because mechanical nature loves its tribalism and loves to it. There is something about, especially in humanity, right? Because many animals are solitary animals, and you know, they don't like to, they like to be loners, right? Lone wolves and great white sharks, and right, they like to be on their own. However, even sharks, even great white sharks, you like last week we were talking about chumming the water. You make the right ruckus in the water, right, with blood in the water and splashing. It's called a feeding frenzy. And boy, when the sharks pick up that vibe, so it's like a switch turns on in the shark's brain, and it just turns into like rabid, chaotic killing machine, right? And it just goes nuts. Well, something very similar happens in humans with this mob mentality stuff, right? And when people start like picking up the wavelength of the mob, um, like people completely lose their minds. So just remember that there's going to be a lot of crazy stuff happening out there in the world on the level of mechanical nature, and you may feel your own mechanical nature jumping and wanting to participate. Just observe yourself and ask yourself, is that behavior out there, is that divine nature or mechanical nature? And observe yourself. What is reacting? What is being triggered? What wants me to participate? Is that my divine nature or mechanical nature? Right? It's a good thing to keep in mind as we move forward, because things are going to be getting crazier and crazier as we move through 2025. Leah says, thank you so much, Atlas. Blessings, everyone. Grateful for your teachings, brother. Thank you, Leah, for being here. Thank you for those kind words. Benjamin says, thank you for sharing your insights on this topic of mechanical nature. It's definitely something we need to explore further, especially as the illusions around us seem to be growing stronger. Now more than ever, it's important that we reconnect with our divine nature. Blessings to you and your noble work, sir. Thank you, Benjamin, and thank you also for always being here. Yang Sheng asks, hi, Atlas. What sports do you usually do for exercise? These days, I don't participate in any team sports or anything. I used to cycle a lot, but the epilepsy more or less brought an end to that, because that's not the safest thing in the world to do when you could potentially have a seizure and out on the road somewhere. So I basically do a lot of walking, and I do some sprinting and resistance training. And ever since the pandemic happened and they closed the gyms, I got all the equipment I need, which I just use, like a high bar for chin ups and pull ups and things like that. And I use body weight training, and resistance bands and that's all I do for resistance training. And then I do a lot of walking and, like I said, sprinting and hiking in the woods and things like that. That's really all it is. Benjamin says, those people are paid actors. Okay. I'm sure there's some of that going on, but on the other hand, the more you look into it, the more you will discover that it's not just some kind of propaganda campaign. It's actually a thing. But anyway, we won't necessarily have to get into that here. Like I said, there's lots of crazy stuff happening out there, and the more crazy stuff that happens, the more our responsibility is to remain sane. And the only way to remain sane is to remain a human being. And the only way to remain a human being and not an intellectual hominid going crazy, doing crazy shit out in the world, is to connect to our divine nature. And that's our being, in order to be, in other words, being. Like, remember the sprouting. To be our being, right? And we're on the razor's edge, right? At any moment, it's to be or not to be. And on that razor's edge, right? Remember to choose being. Okay, thank you everyone for being here today. I hope you have a good week, and hope to see you again next week. And until then, as always, inferential peace. Take care, everyone.